It's October 29th, 2012, 8:47 p.m., Lower Manhattan. A subway worker named Ramon Quiñones is standing at the bottom of the stairs at South Ferry Station, the very last stop at the southern tip of Manhattan. He's been watching the water for 20 minutes now. It started as a trickle coming down the entrance steps, then a stream, then something that had no name he could put to it. He picks up his radio. It's coming in fast, he says. I don't know how fast, real fast. By 9:15 p.m., the platform where Ramon was standing is under 13 feet of water. The station, a $530 million renovation, completed just 4 years earlier, is being swallowed whole. And Ramon? He got out, barely. I'm Mike, and what I'm going to show you today is not a disaster movie. This is real. This happened. And in every single city with a subway system, London, Paris, Tokyo, Chicago, your city, the same clock is ticking. Let's go underground.
Here's something the Transit Authority never puts in their brochures. Right now, as you watch this video, the New York City subway is pumping 13 million gallons of water out of its tunnels. Not because of a storm, not because of a flood, just because it's a normal Tuesday. 13 million gallons every single day, just to keep the tunnels dry enough to run trains. Stop and picture that for a second. That's roughly 20 Olympic swimming pools worth of water every single day, seeping up through the rock and soil, looking for a way in. Now imagine what happens when those pumps stop. The answer is, you get your city back. The water was there first. It will always be there. Every subway system in the world exists in a constant, exhausting war against the water table. The engineers win most days, but the water never surrenders. It just waits. And here's the thing that no engineer likes to say out loud. Every single subway system on Earth has a threshold, a point beyond which the pumps can't keep up, a point where all the engineering and all the planning and all the billions of dollars in infrastructure just isn't enough. We've hit that threshold before. We've hit it multiple times, and the stories of what happened when we did are some of the most extraordinary and terrifying stories in the history of modern cities. Let me tell you a few of them.
Before the disasters, I need to give you one mental image. Just one. Hold on to it. Imagine you're standing in a subway tunnel between stations. The train is gone. It's quiet. That strange humming quiet of deep underground. The air smells like metal and old electricity. The walls are curved concrete, close enough to touch on both sides. And somewhere in the distance, you can hear dripping. Now the dripping gets faster. You look down, there's water around your shoes. You take a step back, the water follows. You walk toward the station, the water's up to your ankles. You're moving faster now. The station is still 300 meters away. The water is at your knees. That is the scenario that subway engineers have nightmares about. Not the flooding you can see coming, the flooding that finds you in the dark, between stations, with nowhere to go. There are 4 ways this starts, and I want you to know them because they each feel completely different when they happen. The first is surface flooding. Rain so heavy it overwhelms the street drains and millions of gallons pour down every subway entrance like a waterfall. You can actually see videos of this happening in New York during summer storms. Water sheeting down the stairs like a river. Usually the pumps catch it. Usually. The second is groundwater surge. Invisible, slow, and in some ways the most insidious. The water table rises after prolonged rain or snowmelt and starts seeping through microscopic cracks in the tunnel walls. There's no alarm, no sudden rush, just a floor that gets wetter and wetter over hours until someone realizes the pumps are losing. The third is storm surge. Ocean water driven by hurricane winds, crashing into a city's lowest points. This is what happened in New York with Sandy. This is what engineers in Miami and Tokyo and Rotterdam lie awake thinking about, because when the ocean decides to come inland, no pump is fast enough. And the fourth is what I call the unknown pipe scenario. A water main bursts, a construction crew drills into a forgotten aquifer, an old freight tunnel nobody had on their maps suddenly connects to a river. Something goes wrong somewhere no one was watching, and the water finds its way in from a direction no one anticipated. That last one is the story of Chicago, and it is absolutely unbelievable. April 13th, 1992, Chicago, a perfectly ordinary Monday morning. At 5:57 a.m., an employee at the Chicago Merchandise Mart, a famous building in the heart of downtown, goes into the basement to check on some minor water seepage they'd reported the previous week. He figures it's a pipe, a slow leak, something maintenance will handle. He opens the basement door. The basement is full of water, moving water, and it's rising. Within the hour, evacuation orders are spreading across downtown Chicago. Building after building is reporting the same thing: basement flooding, coming up through the floor, through the walls, through pipes nobody knew connected to anything. The water isn't coming down, it's coming up. Here is why. Under downtown Chicago, under the streets, under the buildings, under everything, there runs a secret. A network of tunnels built in the early 1900s, originally designed to carry freight through the city without clogging surface streets. By 1992, these tunnels had been out of service for decades. Most Chicagoans had never heard of them. Most city employees couldn't have told you exactly where they ran. And 2 weeks earlier, a contractor working on a bridge over the Chicago River had driven wooden pilings into the riverbed. Routine work. Except, and this is the part where the story becomes almost unbelievable, those pilings went straight through the wall of one of those forgotten tunnels, 60 feet below the river. Nobody knew. There were no current maps. Nobody checked. A small hole formed in the tunnel wall. The Chicago River began seeping in. For 2 weeks, the river silently, invisibly filled the tunnel network. The water spread for miles underground before it had anywhere obvious to go. And then, on the morning of April 13th, the tunnel wall finally gave way. In the space of a few hours, 250 million gallons of the Chicago River poured into 60 miles of underground tunnel, and from there into the basements of over 100 buildings in the loop. City Hall flooded. The Chicago Board of Trade flooded. Banks, hotels, underground parking garages, all flooding simultaneously from the inside, as if the ground itself had become water. The Chicago Transit Authority shut down portions of the subway and elevated rail almost immediately, but the chaos above ground made everything worse. Downed power lines, closed streets, panicked evacuations of some of the most densely occupied buildings in the city. But here's what haunts me most about Chicago 1992, and I want you to really hear this. Nobody died. In a disaster of that scale, 250 million gallons of water, 100 flooded buildings, the entire downtown core paralyzed, not a single person died from the flooding itself, because they had time, because the water came up slowly enough from below that people could evacuate. If those tunnel walls had failed at 8 a.m. instead of 5 a.m., with buildings full of office workers and commuters already underground, the story would have been very different. I want to stay in 1992 for a moment, because it turns out 1992 was a remarkable year for the concept of things that definitely shouldn't flood, flooding. 3 months after Chicago, in January 1992, it's New York City's turn. This one is simpler than Chicago. No forgotten tunnels, no ancient river networks, just a cast iron water main running 120 feet below the corner of 48th Street and 5th Avenue. A pipe that had been sitting in the ground under the pressure of an entire city since the 1930s. A pipe that had developed a fracture nobody knew about. The fracture grew. Slowly, then faster, and then millions of gallons of water were moving through the bedrock toward the B, D, F, and Q subway lines directly below. The tunnels filled to 20 feet, not 20 inches, 20 feet of standing water in subway tunnels beneath one of the most expensive pieces of real estate on Earth. It takes the MTA more than a month to restore service. 35 million gallons pumped out, electrical systems destroyed, signal infrastructure ruined, weeks of disrupted commutes for hundreds of thousands of people. All from one pipe, one fracture in one pipe that nobody knew was there. And here's the lesson New York took from 1992, the one that changed how they planned for everything that came after. The biggest threat to a subway isn't always the weather. It isn't always a hurricane or a flood. Sometimes it's just time. Old pipes, old tunnels, old concrete. The slow, invisible rot of infrastructure that nobody replaced because nobody could see it failing. New York filed that lesson away. They didn't forget it. But they also couldn't quite imagine what was coming. February 18, 2003, Daegu, South Korea, 9:53 a.m. I need you to picture this station. It's rush hour. The platforms are packed. The trains are full. People are standing shoulder to shoulder. Students, office workers, elderly passengers heading to morning appointments. A man boards train 1079, carrying a milk carton. Inside the carton is gasoline. He is in crisis, a man the world had failed, who had decided, in his desperation, to take others with him. He ignites it. Within seconds, the car is burning. Within minutes, the fire spreads to a second train stopped on the opposite platform. And then, something happens that nobody fully predicted. The ventilation system, designed to push air through the station and keep it breathable, starts pulling the smoke deeper into the station. The emergency lights fail. The exits, which passengers had never needed to use and didn't know the location of, are obscured by smoke in under 4 minutes. 192 people die. The world was appalled. South Korea was devastated, and subway engineers from London to Los Angeles quietly began asking themselves the same question: could this happen here? But what I want to focus on, because this is what changed flood preparedness worldwide, is what the investigation found about the systems. The pumps and drains in Daegu Station had been installed, modified, upgraded, and patched over 30 years of operation. Nobody had a clear picture of how they all connected. When investigators modeled what would have happened if the fire had triggered the sprinkler system and flooded the station simultaneously, a real possibility in those systems, they found that the drainage infrastructure couldn't have handled it. Water would have pooled on the platform. Exits would have been partially blocked. After Daegu, cities looked at their emergency infrastructure with new eyes, and most of them didn't like what they saw. The pumps, the exits, the communication systems, all designed in isolation over decades by different teams, with no one responsible for making them work together as a system. Daegu wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. And the cities that listened to that warning were the ones that fared best when 9 years later, the worst subway flooding in American history hit New York City. October 29th, 2012. I want to go back to where we started. But this time, I'm not taking you to South Ferry Station. I'm taking you somewhere else first. I'm taking you to a room at MTA headquarters 24 hours earlier, where a group of engineers and transit officials are looking at weather models and making a decision that no one in their position has ever had to make before. Shut it down. The whole thing. All of it. 5,200 subway cars, 660 miles of track, 472 stations, the largest subway system in the Western Hemisphere, completely dark, completely empty, by 7 p.m. on October 28th. It had only ever been done once before in the system's 108-year history, and some people in that room were not sure it was necessary. Sandy was a big storm, sure, but shutting down New York City's subway is not a small thing. The city doesn't function without it. Millions of people, hospitals, emergency services, all of them need those trains. They shut it down anyway. And then Sandy arrived. The storm surge, ocean water from New York Harbor in the Atlantic, pushed ashore by 80-mile-per-hour winds, rises more than 14 feet above normal tide levels in some places. 14 feet! That's over someone's head on a city street. And all of that water flows downhill, into the lowest points, into the drains, the gutters, the stairwells, into every ventilation grate and emergency exit and access shaft that leads underground. At the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, water pours in like a river and fills the entire tube from floor to ceiling. The Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, which connects Brooklyn to Manhattan under the East River, completely floods. And in the subway tunnels running beneath Lower Manhattan, the tunnels of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, C, and J lines, the water rises and doesn't stop. Now let me tell you about South Ferry, because this is the moment in this story that I think tells you everything. South Ferry Station opened in 2009. It was a triumph, a brand new station at the very tip of Manhattan, built to replace an older, cramped facility. The city had spent $530 million on it. New platforms, new systems, new everything. It was considered one of the most modern stations in the entire system. By the time Sandy was done with it, South Ferry looked like it had been underwater for 50 years. Salt water, not fresh water, salt water, had penetrated every electrical cabinet, every signal relay box, every cable conduit. It had soaked into the concrete and the steel reinforcement beneath. It had destroyed pumps, corroded connections, and ruined equipment that had only been installed 3 years earlier. The station didn't reopen for 4 years. Now here's the number I want you to sit with. In the days after Sandy, the MTA deployed industrial pumps from across the eastern seaboard. They brought equipment in from Texas, from Florida, from Pennsylvania. They ran those pumps around the clock. They pumped 77 million gallons of water out of the subway system. 77 million gallons. And then, after all that water was out, the engineers went in to assess the damage and discovered something that almost broke their spirits. The water being gone wasn't the end of the problem, it was the beginning of the next one, because salt water doesn't just flood a system, it poisons it. The corrosion that salt water starts doesn't stop when you pump the water out. It keeps going for months, eating through metal and insulation and concrete from the inside. The final bill? $5 billion, the longest repair timeline in MTA history, and a complete revolution in how the agency thinks about flood protection. But here's what I keep coming back to. Here's the thing that makes my throat tighten every time I think about it. If the MTA had not shut down the subway, if those trains had still been running when the surge hit, if there had been passengers in those tunnels under Lower Manhattan when the ocean came in, the death toll would have been catastrophic. We're not talking about a few people. We're talking about the potential for one of the worst mass casualty events in American peacetime history. One decision, made by tired people in a conference room, looking at weather charts and arguing about probability. That decision saved lives that will never know they were saved. Here's something I love about London's Underground that most people don't know. The oldest section of the London Underground, the Metropolitan line, which opened in 1863, runs so close to the water table that in certain spots along its route, the original Victorian brickwork is constantly weeping moisture. Not leaking, weeping, like the tunnel itself is sweating, because it is. The water table on either side of those tunnels is higher than the tunnel floor. The only thing keeping those tunnels dry for 160 years is a network of pumps so old that some of them date back to the 1930s, running alongside modern equipment in a system so complex that the engineers who maintain it are essentially archaeologists as much as technicians. And yet, it mostly works. Until it doesn't. August 2004. A summer of relentless rain hits London. Not extraordinary by any global standard, just persistent, heavy English summer rain, the kind of rain that doesn't stop for a week. The pumping infrastructure on the Metropolitan line, the District line, and the Circle line, the oldest sections of the network, running at the shallowest depths, begins to fall behind. Water seeps through Victorian brickwork that, in some places, has not been fully resealed since it was originally built. Several stations partially flood. Dozens of miles of track are affected. Service is suspended across multiple lines. And the thing that scares London engineers even more than the flooding itself, the speed at which it happened. 1 week of heavy rain. That's all it took to push a 160-year-old system to its limits. London has spent billions since 2004 on flood defenses for the underground. Thames Tideway, new pump stations, flood barriers at key tunnel entry points. But let me tell you the scenario that haunts the Thames Water Authority and London Underground jointly, and that they have modeled in simulation more times than I can count. A severe storm hits London at the same time as a high spring tide on the Thames. The Thames Barrier, which has protected London from tidal flooding since 1982, is not designed for the combination of extreme tidal surge and extreme rainfall simultaneously. Engineers have been saying for 20 years that the barrier needs upgrading for climate conditions that didn't exist when it was built. If that storm hits before the upgrades are complete, they have models for that too. They don't share them publicly, but I've spoken to people who've seen them, and none of those people describe what they saw calmly.
I've been talking about numbers, gallons and dollars, and feet of water, and years of repair. But I want to spend a moment in a completely different place. I want to talk about a specific human experience, one that has happened to real passengers in real subway systems more times than you might think. You're on a train. It's between stations, that no man's land of moving darkness, and the train slows, stops, the lights flicker. An announcement comes over the PA system, muffled, unclear. Subway PA systems are famously bad at actually communicating useful information. Something about service disruption, something about waiting for clearance. You look at the other passengers. Everyone's doing the same thing, the universal subway passenger ritual of looking at each other for confirmation that this is normal, this is fine, this happens all the time. And then you hear it. Water. Not dripping, moving. Somewhere in the dark outside the window, water is moving. In emergency psychology, there's a concept called normalcy bias, the tendency of human beings to assume in an ambiguous emergency that things are probably fine, that there's a normal explanation, that someone is handling it. Normalcy bias is why people in burning buildings pause to gather their belongings, why people on sinking ships wait to be told to put on a jacket. In a flooding subway, normalcy bias is the enemy. The people who survive tunnel flooding events, and there have been real incidents where passengers were trapped in tunnels with rising water, in Zhangzhou, China in 2021 being the most recent and most deadly. The people who survive are the ones who override their normalcy bias, who look at the water around their ankles and say, "This is not fine," and who move immediately. Let me tell you about Zhangzhou, July 20th, 2021. A catastrophic rainstorm hits Zhangzhou, the capital of Hainan Province in China. In 1 hour, the city receives the equivalent of a year's worth of average rainfall.
The streets above flood instantly, and the water, finding the lowest points, pours into the subway. Passengers on Line 5 were trapped in a tunnel between stations for hours. The water rose to chest height. People climbed on each other's shoulders. People who couldn't swim held on to the overhead rails. They sang songs. They cried. They used their phones to send messages to their families until the water reached their phones. 14 people died in that tunnel. Hundreds were rescued. And the survivors, when they were interviewed afterward, said the same thing over and over again. At first, we thought it would stop. We thought someone would come. We thought the water would only come up so high. Normalcy bias, in a subway tunnel, in rising water. I don't say this to frighten you. I say it because knowledge is the one thing that overrides normalcy bias. If you know that water in a subway tunnel can rise faster than you think possible, you don't wait to see if it stops. You move.
Here's where I leave you. Every time you descend into a subway station, in New York, in London, in Paris, in Tokyo, in any city in the world, you are making a bet. Not a big bet, not a scary bet, a completely reasonable, statistically sound bet that the engineers and operators who maintain that system have done their jobs well enough that the water stays out and the trains run. Most days, you win that bet without even knowing you made it. But I want you to understand the scale of what's behind that bet. The thousands of pumps running right now, the maintenance workers in tunnels tonight that you'll never see, the emergency planners wargaming flood scenarios on a Wednesday afternoon because their job is to imagine disasters so you don't have to experience them. And I want you to understand one more thing. Climate change, I'm not here to argue about causes, I'm talking about engineering facts, is raising sea levels, intensifying storms, and increasing rainfall in ways that every transit authority in the world is already planning around. Not might happen, already happening. The floods of Sandy and Zhengzhou and Chicago were extreme events by the standards of the century that produced them. They will be less extreme by the standards of the century ahead. Every subway system on Earth was designed for a climate that no longer exists. The engineers know this. The best ones are rebuilding, reinforcing, rethinking. Tokyo has built the most extraordinary flood diversion infrastructure in the world, a cathedral of underground cisterns designed to catch and redirect floodwater before it ever reaches the subway. It's extraordinary. I'll do a whole video on it. Other cities are moving more slowly, doing the math, looking at the price tag, hoping the next big storm is someone else's problem. Water, as I said at the beginning of this video, is patient. It doesn't have a budget, it doesn't have a deadline, it doesn't care that you just spent $530 million renovating a station. It flows downhill, it finds the cracks, and it waits for the moment when the pumps can't keep up. And every once in a while, on a night in October in New York, or a morning in April in Chicago, or an afternoon in July in Zhengzhou, the water stops waiting. I'm Mike. You've been underground with me for half an hour, and I genuinely appreciate that. Stay curious, watch the water, and maybe, just maybe, take the stairs.